Jason.
Hello.
Neither of those people are me. I'm behind the camera. I want to introduce everybody to the VP of Animation Warner Brothers, the man responsible for most of the stuff that we love and talk about all the time. We just watched 2 episodes of Scavenger's Reign. We also watched Toonami's Exquisite Corpse and the Rick and Morty Run the Jewels video, of all of which you had your fingers in. So I'm going to let our moderators introduce themselves, and thank you so much for coming tonight.
Jason. Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Hi, my name is Emily Carisch. I'm a film student here at CU Denver.
Hi, I'm Kiera Tomlinson.
Recording in progress.
I'm an animation student at CU Denver.
Nice to meet both of you.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you so much for coming. We have a couple of questions for you, so we're just going to get started. Is that all right?
Yeah, let's go for it. I'm ready.
Okay, so we all just watched the first 2 episodes of Scavenger's Reign, and we were curious. It originally started as an animated short. Could you tell us a little bit about the process of expanding a short into a full season?
Scavenger's Reign was originally part of when AdultSwim.com was still a destination that people went to look at anything, which it is not now. There was a budget at that time to make original short pieces of either animation or live action comedy or whatever. There was a small budget. The man who ran AdultSwim.com named Matt Harrigan, he used it as an almost development pipeline to sort of throw money at little things to see if you could make some little interesting things, and if they worked, then maybe you would think about expanding them. So Scavenger's Reign was an animator named Joe Bennett, who ended up being one of the co-directors of the show and the creator of the show. Joe Bennett had this idea for an animated short about what if we did this thing where it was all about just the environment, and it's almost the environment is the character, was sort of the original conceit. And we want to do this weird little science fiction short. So Matt Harrigan came to me because I run the Toonami block, and he was like, look, I don't know how much sense this makes for AdultSwim.com because we mostly do comedy, but if we made this thing, do you think you'd want to premiere it on Toonami? And I mean, it very much spoke to me, even in the rough stage where they were sort of putting it together. And I said, yes, let's put it on Toonami. So after Toonami, it did well enough and got enough of a response that my immediate thought was starting to scheme about, well, how do we get this greenlit as a show? So I went to my boss at the time, who was the man who was running Adult Swim, Mike Lazo, not a fan of science fiction, not a fan of serious things. And Mike basically was like, why do you want to make this? I don't get it. And he was a Southern gentleman. And I basically was like, Mike, you don't understand the appeal of this, but trust me, this is a unique thing. You got to let me develop it as a show. So he basically, for me, because I wouldn't shut up, said, okay, fine, we'll throw a little money at you and maybe we can put together a pilot episode, which is fairly common practice. So I got together with Joe and Charles, and basically we tried to figure out, because there wasn't a huge budget, and we tried to figure out how do we turn this short idea that was really based on animators having fun into a story. And it was quite a process because Joe and Charles had a few points of reference, like the movie Annihilation was a clear point of reference. Weird science fiction in general, Solaris was a huge point of reference, but they weren't really thinking about a story arc. And so it was a lot of work for me as a development person to help them understand that there needs to be characters people care about if you want them to tune in every week for 10 weeks or however many episodes. But that doesn't mean you can't have the environment be another character or even a main character in the show. And so a lot of the balance in the early days of the screenwriting was figuring out how they create interesting, compelling characters with narrative arcs, but that also allowed for the environment, basically for the animators to be able to do what they wanted to do, which was make these interesting, weird environmental decisions about how certain creatures in this ecosystem worked. And they were maybe in some ways more fascinated by that than the characters. And it was sort of my job, I felt at the time, was helping them understand that I don't think the characters need to completely take over that, but they definitely need to be more of a focus. And in the end, I thought they got there, but when I showed it to Adult Swim, they didn't. They were like, this doesn't work for us. We're going to kill the show. So I was basically like, well, I refuse to accept that. So at the time, HBO Max was, and it's now Max, but I still call it HBO Max, was buying a lot of stuff. So a guy there named Billy Wee, who's now the head of comedy development for Netflix, he was the head of animation development. I called Billy and said, will you take a look at this thing? If you like science fiction and adult animation that doesn't feel like anything else, I really think you'll like it. I would like to bring it to you guys at Max to take over because I think Adult Swim is passing. And it was a little bit weird because at the time, HBO Max wasn't really buying things from Adult Swim like that. So everybody was very confused. Like, why don't you just let it go? And I was like, absolutely, I'm not letting it go. So I showed it to Billy. He loved it. They took it on. And that's why, the weird thing is, it's funny. I worked on the show for years. My name's not on it because it went to HBO Max. And then officially, I was still a producer on it, but I didn't get a credit because HBO Max is weird about how they do that. But they had me stay on as a producer the whole time. And then Billy ended up leaving before the show even came out. So it was really a weird thing. Like the only person involved from beginning to end was me, but it came out on Max and I don't really work for Max. I'm just part of like the ecosystem here. So very, very unusual way the show got made. And frankly, a miracle that it got made and a miracle that when all the shows were getting canceled a couple years back, I'm sure you saw all the news. I had several shows that were written off. It's incredibly painful. I was constantly like, please don't let this happen to Scavengers. And it didn't, thank God. And we actually got out and were able to put the show out. But it was a very, very tricky journey from beginning to end for that show. Sorry, that's a really long answer, but
That was great. That was so interesting. Thank you so much. We actually have a question from one of our audience members. If anyone would like to come up and ask it, are they here?
Me? Shall I just...
Yeah, we have a seat here. We get to draw them up. They don't know beforehand, so.
I didn't bring my phone. That's what I wrote on. But I had watched it with my family and my parents. Cool. And I asked my dad if he had any questions actually, and he just kind of wanted to know what like the creature creation looked like because my mom is really into biology, and she was like pointing out that a lot of the like behaviors in the creatures in the show are like very similar to ones that are like behaviors of creatures in like real life in our ecosystem. So I was just kind of curious like if you guys looked into that while creating the show, if it was just kind of like creativity that happened to like mimic real life. Or...
It was a little of both. I mean, it was definitely that Joe and Charles and the writers had their own ideas when they were brainstorming and would watch nature documentaries frequently about things like insects, or aquatic creatures, or things that you don't think of the way mammals, sort of the mammalian ecosystem works, which we're all very familiar with. And then it would also be animators going, I got an idea for this weird creature that's got like a Venus flytrap head. And it would honestly flow between the two where the animator would say, well, I have this creature. And the writers will go, well, maybe that creature could do this. And then this creature could come out of it. And then the animator would come back and refine it. But it was truly like a meeting of the minds for all of those scenes. Because there was a lot of argument internally among, not me because I was the producer. So I was like, figure it out, nerds, but there was a lot of argument amongst animators and writers about like what made more sense, what didn't make sense, what was just a cool atmospheric thing, even if it didn't strictly make sense from a evolutionary ecosystem point of view. But a lot of it was grounded in real scientific principles. And then a lot of it was grounded by just somebody thinking something looked really cool, which to me is always a good mix.
Cool. Thank
Great
you.
question. Thank you.
Having worked in both children's and adults animated television, what would you define as the key differences in storytelling for adults versus children?
That's a good question. I mean, besides the commercial aspect, which is a whole nother conversation, when you were creating shows for young people, let's say, let's define young as under 10 years old, right? for children, clearly children. I think there is a sense of responsibility on the part of the storyteller to be clear about what you're trying to say with the particular show, what the characters mean, how they relate to one another, what the point of not just a scene is, what the point and message of the show is. So whether that's something like for very young kids like Peppa Pig or Blue's Clues or whatever, where it's literally boiling down simple moral lessons to help kids understand a framework about the world, to a little bit on the older scale where you're really getting more into storytelling and sort of the joy of how a story unfolds and the excitement of a character going through a journey and what that means and how that affects those characters. I think for adults, you don't have to, the job of an adult telling a story is very different than when you're telling a story to kids. When you're telling a story to kids, I do think as a creator, you have some amount of responsibility to try to, it doesn't mean that everything has to be filled with lessons or anything like that, but I do think you have a responsibility to try to help them understand some aspect of the world, whatever it is that you're trying to talk about, right? For an adult, I don't think it's your job to help them understand something. I don't think it's your job to deliver a clear moral framework. I think it is your job as an artist to say what you feel like saying, whatever that is. That could be something someone really keys in with and a bunch of other people don't understand or actively dislike. To me, the difference between adult and child storytelling at its core is an adult is a fully formed human, theoretically, that will interact with something based on their own pre-existing principles and morals and view of the world. And your job as a creator is really just to speak your truth, and they either will interact with it or they won't. And you can't control that, and you shouldn't worry about it too much, frankly. And if you do, I think you're generally going to make bad art. But for kids, I actually think it's very different. You should be thinking about a child's reaction to what you're making and what you want them to take away from it, what you want them as a young mind absorbing information, what information you want them to absorb that you're giving them. And so that can sound puritanical, but I don't mean that you always have to tell them whatever good moral lessons are. I just mean you have to tell them the truth about something and know what you're doing and do it with intent, because every thing a young child watches, they're soaking up and taking it as a lesson. And that can be a good or bad lesson, whatever it is, but your job is to sort of make sure that you are thinking about that responsibly. And I think most of the kids creators I know definitely think about that. Even the ones that are like, nah, man, it's just jokes. They say that, but then when they get in the room and they make a show, they are clearly delivering some sort of moral framework or message that they clearly believe, and I think that's how it should be when you're talking to kids.
It's a great answer. We're also curious about the adult versus children television. Are there some things that you specifically enjoyed or found frustrating about one versus the other?
I'm the SVP of adult action and anime, right? And I'm very lucky because that's my area of interest. I'm not great with comedy. I mean, I like comedy, but I'm not like a comedy guy. And I am not a comedy nerd. I'm a nerd about a million other things, but most people who get into comedy stuff are comedy nerds, as it should be. I also like the kids space, but I find more freedom in the adult space. I think for me, animation's like growth potential in the US is teaching people that animation can be something enjoyed by adults, and it doesn't have to be Family Guy. It doesn't have to be funny jokes. It doesn't have to be Rick and Morty. It can be serious, and it can deal with serious issues, and it doesn't have any responsibility to make you laugh or be for kids. Now, in other countries like Japan, obviously, they have understood this for years and years. And clearly, thank God, younger generations are interacting with this stuff from other countries and getting a taste of it early and growing older and going, why aren't more shows from around the world being made like this? Why is it just Japan and, France and a couple other places? The thing with kids is, besides the kids market being a very tough place right now because kids are largely not watching television and they're not watching shows on streaming. They're watching things on YouTube, Roblox, and TikTok. That makes it very challenging to make a kids show because ultimately making a TV show requires somebody spend a lot of money. And what used to happen was someone would spend a lot of money and then there would be toys and kids would buy the toys. And kids don't buy toys anymore anywhere near as much as they used to. So it's very hard to make a kids show now as compared to even 10 years ago because there's not a lot of financial upside, and convincing someone to spend money on kids is very, very tough from a business point of view. On top of that, making a kids show is in a lot of ways harder than making an adult show because, again, you have that level of responsibility and that level of clarity when speaking to kids that you need to have. So I much prefer adult shows simply because I've been waiting my whole life for a show like Scavenger's Reign, and to be able to be one of the people making that show is literally why I was put on this earth, among other things. But it really does feel like a calling for me. So for my particular taste, adult animation all the way. I do love kids animation. I have promoted and been involved with and worked on kids shows before, but I think people who do that for a living have a very specific view of storytelling and how they want to interact with the world. People like Rebecca Sugar, who are able to, Rebecca could tell a story any way she wants, period. She's a genius. She chose to tell a story in the kids milieu because it felt right to her and who she is as an artist. And that's the way it should be. For me and who I am, adult storytelling is definitely more my milieu.
As an animator, I was just gonna say I really appreciate and resonate with all of that.
Do you?
I do.
Yeah, that's very powerful to hear. Thank you for saying all that. We have another question from our audience. Would Sophie like to come up? Yeah.
Oh, let me go find it. Okay. Hi.
Hey.
I have some friends that are animators. They couldn't make it, but they do say hi.
Oh, we'll tell them I said hello back.
Yeah. So my question is, how do you think 2D animation is used as a primary storytelling device, and kind of what future do you see for it and films like Spider-Verse that I've heard described as like 2.5D?
So Spider-Verse, I think, was a sort of cosmic boom for animation as an industry in a lot of ways. Certainly, when Spider-Verse came out, I was in Japan, and every Japanese animator or director I talked to was talking about it. Not necessarily as something that they wanted to emulate, but as they immediately saw, this is new. This is a new thing. Simultaneously, a lot of Japanese anime productions have been introducing blended CG for a long time, usually badly, but in the last 5 to 10 years, they've started to get really good at it. There are shows out there like Dorohedoro. There's a lot of shows that do that 2.5D thing really well. They didn't have $150 million production budgets like Spider-Verse, so it doesn't look as good as Spider-Verse, but it's, the same principle. And then flash forward to a couple years later, I saw the second Spider-Verse movie with my director, Kenji Kamiyama, who's directing the Lord of the Rings movie I'm producing. When he walked out of the movie, he was depressed. He was like, how will we ever get that level of, how could we ever do that? I don't know how we're going to compete with that, with our movie that we're making. And after a while, he came around and was very excited about it. But his initial reaction was, oh my God, the level of quality here is insane, because what those movies actually did was what, Puss in Boots did to a lesser degree, what the Ninja Turtles movie did to a lesser degree. They are integrating CG, 2D, and anime techniques in a way that filters all of them together to come out making something that feels new. It feels new. They're the first movies in a long time that actually let animators express themselves in a way that is the different from the vernacular of the way they were allowed to express themselves in feature filmmaking through Disney and other, DreamWorks for years and years and years. As we all know, it was 2D animated big ass Disney movies and DreamWorks movies, and maybe a few here or there that were not that, maybe a few outliers. Then it was Pixar and Pixar-esque stuff. And Spider-Verse was the first movie in a long time that did really well, that showed people you can do something else. You can do something that isn't the things you've already seen. So I think it has opened the floodgates for dumb development executives like myself who don't like animation to be like, oh, so you mean if we let those nerds go crazy, they'll make some cool looking shit people like? Yes, that actually happens. You don't have to just stand on their heads and force them to draw stuff that looks like Disney movies from 20 years ago. And the fact that Ninja Turtles was a success, Puss in Boots was a success, Spider-Verse was a huge success, despite the, certain bad stories about Spider-Verse's creation. The fact is it was a success, and it has resonated globally. When I go to France and talk to French animators, when I go to Japan, when I go to Korea, they all feel it. And I do think the future of animation is going to be some combination of using CG as a backbone and 2D as basically not flair, but it's going to be a real combination of the two. And I think that's going to end up creating some more really exciting work that will somewhat take us beyond Spider-Verse, I think. We'll see what the next Spider-Verse movie does before I say that. They may do something even crazier. But I do think, though, that was a big, big moment in animation in our industry.
That's cool. That's insightful. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have another audience question from Jay over here. I feel so powerful just summoning them.
I will.
Hi, I am also an animator, currently actually working on my own film. I have a question for the difference between working on something that's more comedic and working on something more narrative, like Scavenger's Reign. What are the main differences do you feel? Obviously you've worked in a lot of adult comedy stuff. Do you feel like it's easier to work in that range, especially if it's for an adult thing, or is it more freedom in a more narrative way?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I actually think it depends on a variety of factors because, of course, so where I came up was through Adult Swim, which was a very different style until Rick and Morty, was a very different style of comedy animation. Aqua Teen was very much almost more improv. It was stream of consciousness. The animation was super cheap. The staff was super small. The creators voiced half the characters themselves and wrote everything. And if a scene didn't work, they would literally get in there and just re-edit it and mess with it and then reanimate whatever they needed to, re-record lines. They would just sort of, ironically, this is how Miyazaki makes movies. He just does it with 8 years and $200 million. These guys did it with $30,000 to make an episode and a couple weeks. But it's the same principle, which is throw everything at it. That doesn't work. Rip it all out, put it back in. It's very inefficient, but it can lead to legitimate brilliance if you let it happen. Then there's the way of a Family Guy episode, using that as an example of a popular show, which is almost written like a live action sitcom. It's all about getting a very good writer, writing a bunch of very solid jokes, boarding it out very cleanly. And there's not a lot of changes from script to board to delivery of the episode. It's much more like a factory, which I don't say that with any kind of in a derogatory way, because it can result. I mean, Bob's Burgers is a brilliant show and it's made that way. But it leaves less room for improvisation when you do it that way. And I think with narrative long form that is serious, it's less about the writing depending on the show. Using Scavengers as an example, it's less about the writing. Scavengers left a lot of room for the animators to come up with cool, interesting things. And sometimes the writers will go back and change the script based on what an animator did. again, that's an inefficient method, but it did result in a show we thought was great. So I think it's different depending on the creator and the show. Generally, I do feel I feel comedy's harder in general. I just think it is, because you'll write a joke, you think it's great, you show it to your boss, they think it's stupid, or they're too stupid to get the joke, and then you have to explain the joke, at which point the joke is over because they feel stupid you had to explain it to them. Or you play it for a focus group, and half the people in the room are like, that's not funny, or I'm offended by that, or whatever it is. I just think comedy is very, very hard. I think narrative storytelling is hard too, but I think when you're telling a serious story, you're given more grace by the audience. Generally, they're like, if they're receptive, they're saying, I'm going to wait and see what happens here. I know that this is an unfolding story. I may be impatient with this moment, but hopefully this moment leads to something else. When it's a comedy, I think people tend to approach it more like, why aren't I laughing right now? Where's this joke? This isn't funny. This is dumb. Like, you don't get a lot of grace. You got to, moment to moment, you have to work way harder in comedy. So for me, that leaves, as a creator, that leaves less room for the sublime to happen. But there are other people for whom crafting those really great moments that make a good comedy is like everything. And that's like the Rick and Morty team and their writers. That's what they love doing. I love more the narrative form because it's a little bit less focused on writing. And writing is something I obviously love, but as a viewer, I'm not that interested in great writing. I'm interested in a great vibe, a great mood, a great feeling. And that honestly interests me more. And that's the kind of shit I make, for better and worse.
Thank you.
Yep.
Another question we had is, obviously, if you can't think of anything, no pressure, but can you think of ways that you have grown as a storyteller while working around like creative restraints, specifically in big city projects like budget and time and money and that kind of cuts that happen around that?
I mean, it's just tricky. It's like when you do it long enough, you scale with whatever you've got to work with, if that makes sense. You look at I think I work best, and many other creators work best, when given a set of parameters that are somewhat clearly defined, but not super detailed. So it's like, we need this and we need this, but how you do that, figure it out yourself. That is great because you got your destination, you maybe have some guardrails, and then you have the freedom to feel like you're problem solving to figure those things out. But in the middle of all of that, you can figure out some stuff you really like and you really want to do that are unique to you. And maybe you can afford it with your budget, or maybe you have the time to do it and maybe you don't. So I think too many limitations can be very limiting. What I've seen on the other side is too much freedom. Sorry, too much freedom can be its own trap. I have worked with creators as a producer who I've been like, I love you. We've got plenty of time. We've got plenty of money. We just want to work with you. Do whatever you want. And they're like, what do you mean do whatever I want? And I'm like, well, you're a legend. You've written how many great shows? Like, what do you want to do that you've never been able to do before? And even there are some creators who are legends who will be like, that's too much freedom for me. And they dither and waste time and maybe don't come up with a good idea. So it's tricky. I think I work best in that way of just having a goal and having a very clear objective and then being allowed to get there however I need to. That's not always freedom you're given at every streamer or network or production house or company. Luckily, I am, and I think that's the best way to work.
Awesome. We also have another question from Jack.
Hi, Jason. First of all, I love your shirt. My question was, as someone who's kind of worked on both sides of it now, as far as pitching shows, or in your case, pitching like whole blocks, and then now as an executive, what are the things you've learned pitching, and then what do you look for as an executive now, as far as a pitch, and what you find is most successful, and just I guess asking as a young person advice for pitching yourself.
I mean, pitching has gotten trickier than it used to be. If you are somebody that doesn't have a pre-existing relationship, is not a known creator, then the best advice I could give anyone for their pitch is have it be as well thought out and developed as humanly possible. When we get pitches that get our attention, besides being that special something that's interesting, and I can't tell you how to do that, that's just something people come up with or they don't. It's usually, they're not super fleshed out. There's not always like an animation test, although that's increasingly being a thing certainly streamers are expecting, which is a real pain in the ass for us and a lot of other people. But at the very least, you want a nice, clean story synopsis, some character breakdowns of who the characters are, the main characters, not every character, because then it's too many. The main characters, maybe some good drawings or sketches of those characters, and then either a background or two or a piece of key art that sells the idea of your show or movie, whatever it is. And then sometimes people will also give us the first episode script. That's not always necessary, but never hurts. And then if you're doing it yourself and you have time, animation tests are always a great idea. I mean, nothing sells it better than showing something moving, because development executives are dumb and slow. And if you can be like, here it is, dummy, then they will get it much faster. Even somebody who's been in this career for years and years can look at a drawing and still not know what the vibe of this thing is going to be like. When they see it move, it's going to make a big difference. So what I generally say is, even if you're doing it yourself, the more you can flesh out these ideas, bouncing them off of your fellow creatives, bouncing them off of your friends, your family members, whoever's opinion matters to you, is very, very valuable. Self-interrogation of, is this a good idea? Is this idea refined enough? Have I pared this down to its essence? Is very important. We do get pitches all the time that are just too long. It's just too much. When you're getting as many pitches as we do, you're just not going to read a 30-page document. You don't have the time. You're just like, yeah, okay, this is too much. I don't understand this. Like, you just move on. So I think keeping it simple, to the point, clear, the best art you can provide, the cleanest writing you can provide, and maybe if you have time, if you have ability, if you have friends who have ability, if you have money, whatever it is, some sort of test animation very much helps. And then you just do your best and send it to people and hope you get a response. That's the kind of stuff that gets our attention. The other things that get our attention from creators that aren't well-known people are an interesting concept, beautiful artwork, or a unique artwork. It doesn't have to be traditionally beautiful, interesting. All of those things get attention. So that's what I would say. That's a good basic pitch document. Should be about 6 or 7 pages long at the most.
Awesome, thank you.
So we have another question. Could you tell us about the conversations between creators when adapting anime shows for American audiences, like with Toonami?
Sure. So I like to say, because I'm doing it right now with the Lord of the Rings movie, my job for almost 30 years has been explaining anime to stupid Americans and then explaining American production to Japanese people. And that is what I've been doing for 25 years. So it's very, very challenging working in the American television landscape and explaining any anime show to an executive who is not a fan of anime. Most of them are old. Most of them are white. Most of them are not watching anime. Their kids may be, or their kids' kids, depending on their age. I can't tell you how many times I've heard, oh, Death Note, oh, Dragon Ball Z, oh, my kid likes that, or whatever the new show is. Attack on Titan. Oh yeah, my daughter's really into that. I can't mess with. I don't watch it. It's just, that is a pervasive attitude amongst American development executives. So making anime for an international audience or American audience, depending on how you have to look at it, can be very tricky because fundamentally the storytelling language of an anime is totally different. Japanese storytelling is built on different traditions culturally. It's built on a different way of looking at the world. They don't care as much about stories that go A, B, C and proceed in a linear fashion and have a beginning, middle, and an end with a nice denouement. Like they don't do that. they don't they don't mind stories that where everything doesn't make sense. That's okay. Now, that has resonated globally with millions of people, but there is a segment of the American audience and the European audience who don't understand it at all. So when I'm developing shows and I'm bringing scripts that have been translated from Japanese to English, sometimes poorly or sort of not great, the scripts will be gobbledygook sometimes. I mean, like to an American, they're like, what is happening between these two characters? And I know anime well enough to go, no, well, this is what's happening, this and this is what that means. But it's very challenging because the other thing is in the anime process, as you guys I'm sure may have already talked about, animators when they make anime are allowed to change things that affect the story in midstream. So they'll have a script, but the script is more of a guideline. When it goes to boarding, the board artist may go, oh, I want to change this. And if the director approves it, the director will go, yeah, that's fine. And they don't worry about what does that mean downstream 5 episodes from now. They don't care. And then the animator gets it and they make it and they make a small change to a scene that changes the intent of a character or a story. And the director either says, no, go back and fix it. Or the director goes, yeah, that's fine. And so you will get a final episode that is not totally different, but markedly different from your script. And with American animation, that doesn't happen unless it's an avant-garde show like Aqua Teen or whatever you want to pick as your version of avant-garde. But in an American show like Family Guy, you build it all, you get it locked in, you send it to Korea, it gets animated, and it looks exactly like you want it to look, and it is timed exactly to that rough cut you sent them, and you're done. The way anime is made is much more interpretive, it's much more free-flowing, and it can be maddening to American executives who are like, this character, I thought this character was going to die, now they're what? Like they don't, So it's very hard for me sometimes as the development executive to be like, well, that's what the director wanted, because here in the US, what the director wanted matters, but what the network or streamer wants matters more. And in Japan, what the director wants is all that matters to anyone involved. And that can be a problem too when the director is crazy or an idiot or has a bad idea. No one's going to tell him no because they're the director. And it's like, well, he's the director. And I'm like, yeah, he has a stupid idea. And they're like, well, we're not telling him that. You tell him that. So that can be a challenge on my end the other way, where I'm like, I kind of agree with the American note here. This doesn't make sense. This is bad. This is not going to work out. And it's a very delicate dance for me to go and be like, hey, would you really consider making this change? Because most of the time directors in Japan aren't asked to do that. And so I have to build a rapport and a trust with them to where if I ask them that, they don't think, who is this asshole gaijin, And sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. So it's very, very tricky because fundamentally I am importing a piece of art and culture from another country and trying to make it work in a country that's not its country of origin for a network of people who may or may not understand it to get to an audience that I think will understand it. And I feel like my job is protecting the original storytelling intent as much as possible from outside interference. And at the same time, trying to make sure that the network gets what they need.
Hi, Jason. So, you're kind of blowing my mind with all the hats that you're wearing and all the different things that you're describing doing. Can you give us kind of an idea during the course of a day what your job as a development executive for animation looks like, and how much time do you actually have to look at pitches, to look at new stuff? And how does that even work? I mean, do you have like a network of worker ants that bring you the most promising ones, or are you the first level of resistance?
It's a good question. I mean, so it's a little bit of both. So it's a mix of people in my department coming to me. So to give you guys a sneak peek, I am developing a Scooby-Doo movie, right? I'm developing a Scooby-Doo anime movie. In this movie, Shaggy is going to get bitten and turned into a werewolf, right? This movie may or may not happen, by the way. So this is just completely pie in the sky, but I'm developing it. Scooby dies. Scooby's going to die. Now, he may come back to life, but he's going to die. This is for adults. This is a very different take on Scooby-Doo, and it would be an anime 70-minute straight-to-video movie, right? This thing may or may not happen, but how it came to be was one of my coworkers' jobs is developing Warner Brothers IP into things. I've upset people. He might come back to life. We'll take that note. I'll take that note. Basically, one of their jobs is developing Warner IP into existing projects, right? So DC, Mad Max, whatever. And part of what they know my area of expertise is anime, which is a different thing for Warner Brothers Animation. So they came to me and said, "Well, is there a Scooby-Doo anime idea?" And we went and talked to a bunch of anime studios. They'd all heard of Scooby-Doo. Some of them were like, "Nah, we don't want to do Scooby-Doo." And some of them were like, "Oh, yeah, we have a cool idea for Scooby-Doo." So in that case, it was brought to me by my coworkers. There are other cases. For example, I'm reading a manga right now that's an adaptation of Lovecraft's At the Mountains of Madness. I think it's a great adaptation. And I immediately was like, I want to find out if that creator is amenable and if these rights are available to developing this into some sort of series. I don't know that that'll happen either. But all day, it's a series of conversations like that. Like, that's how Lord of the Rings happened. Someone came to me and said, "Do you like Lord of the Rings?" And I was like, yes, I'm a massive Tolkien nerd. And they're like, "What about anime?" And I'm like, "I'm your guy if you want Lord of the Rings anime." But it's sort of a mix. And I am busy. I have very weird hours because I'm talking to New Zealand, London, LA, and Japan, but I live in Atlanta, Georgia. So I have to work really weird hours, and it sucks sometimes. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I really don't like at the end of the day when everyone else gets to relax. I have a lot of meetings from 5 to 9 p.m. and I can't see my wife and my dogs and my daughter when she comes over for dinner. So that gets to be a drag. At the same time, I do end up having a decent amount of downtime and an actual life, but it does require that I put work aside sometimes. So I am constantly being inundated with not necessarily pitches, but more like opportunities. And then I'm meeting with artists in Japan and studios in Japan all the time who are pitching me shows and pitching me ideas and asking if we want to be involved as a production committee partner. And so I do make time, but I'm not making time in a clearly defined way. I'm literally just keeping my head above water most days. I'm like, oh, today I have 3 hours. Okay, good. I can pay some bills. I can play a video game. And then the next day I don't have any time. So it sort of just depends. But it comes to me in all different ways. It's literally just interfacing with coworkers and then having meetings with third parties. And then sometimes I'll have my own idea, although that's rare.
Because I'm pretty stupid.
This is why we're always talking like 2 a.m, right? I understand this now.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, you're talking to a room full of 20-year-olds, really at the very beginning of their careers, and this university is really well known for their animation department. It's a really top-notch one. Can you give some kind of advice? What would you tell yourself maybe as an aspirant? And I'm going to jump back behind the camera.
I would say it's it's very easy in the entertainment industry to let yourself get taken advantage of because let's face it, it's a very hard job market. Money's tight for everybody, more than it ever has been in my lifetime. And the opportunities on the ground are thin. And it's very easy to go, well, I have this opportunity, I'm just going to do it, and then be at a place and find yourself working there for years, 5 years, and realize you've made no growth. And my feeling is the clearest message I would give to anybody is life is short. It's shorter than you can possibly imagine. And the thing you should always do for yourself, for your own happiness, and therefore the happiness of your loved ones and the people you interact with, is to take opportunities to follow your muse to learn new things. Every job you take in this industry should be an opportunity for you to learn something and get better at something yourself. So even if you're working on a show you don't like and you're taking a paycheck because it gets you in the door, you should be looking at that job as, what am I trying to get out of this job? Besides the paycheck, what am I trying to learn and get better at? And then while you're there, what can I learn from the other people who I'm with? And how can I tune into the thing I'm really good at, or I want to be really good at, or I feel like I can really excel in? And then don't be afraid to leave and take that risk of leaving a secure situation if you can find another opportunity that also feels, even if it's a lateral move or whatever, as they say, it's also an opportunity where you can learn something else. The greatest thing that happened to me was, though I worked at the same company, I bounced around in different places, and everywhere I went, I learned how to do a different thing. And all of those learnings eventually built on themselves until I was able to get to a point where I was doing things I really loved. And even then, when I had access to running my own department and was doing kind of whatever the fuck I wanted with an open paycheck, I still was making sure to bring in people that I could learn from and that they could learn from me, and try things we hadn't done and do new things and do weird things that didn't make sense, because it felt like we should be trying to push ourselves to learn new things. Because to me, that was one of the more exciting things about working in this business. But what I've seen over the years is a lot of people get stuck in the zone of, and I place no blame on anybody, but they're like, I'm getting a paycheck, I'm getting health care, like, it's scary out there. And that's all true. But I also think that sometimes it's not as scary as you think it's going to be when you leave the nest and try a new thing. And sometimes it doesn't work out. But even in the not working out, which has happened to me before, you learned something important for yourself. And the only way you're going to figure out how to be happy doing some creative work is knowing what feels good to you and what doesn't, and being able to stand on that, like, and mean it. You're not, I don't think, going to have a perfect work situation. Most of us don't. And it may be years before you get to a work situation you think is really great. But along the way, every place you work, you should be using them. Use them and their infrastructure and their connections and their money to try to bleed any knowledge, any growth, anything you can from them, because companies don't care about you. Even my company, I've worked at for 30 years, they don't give a fuck about me. But I have traded off, I've given them great stuff, and they've given me a lot of great opportunities, and I earned those opportunities, but they earn that great stuff. So as long as that relationship remains mutually beneficial, great. The day it's not, I don't care who I work for. I'm not working there anymore. Because to me, the more important thing is always going to be, do I have a sense of enjoying what I'm doing? And if I'm not enjoying what I'm doing, then I need to re-examine that, the reasons why. Is it me? Is it them? Whatever. Because it's not always them. But I would just say, when you go somewhere, the key thing is Do not let yourself go, I'm miserable, this sucks, I don't like it, they're not letting me do what I want to do. What can you learn from them? What can you glean from them? How can you use what they're giving you to your advantage? Even if it's like on off hours, I'm going to do my own shit, whatever it is, because they have tools you can use to better yourself. And eventually, the people that do that, I find, end up landing in a good place because they have slowly improved their craft and have focused on the things they want to do and they know how to be good at. And that has led them to an opportunity that presented itself because they kept going and going and going. And honestly, perseverance is, people underestimate it. Everyone wants to think talent is the most important thing. It is not. Talent is super important. But there's tons of people out there who have shows that are shitty, boring shows that aren't super talented. They just had the perseverance. They didn't quit. They just kept going till that opportunity came in front of them and they seized it. But the only way you can do that is if you don't quit and you keep pushing, slowly grinding it sometimes. Sometimes it feels like a grind. Sometimes it doesn't. So that's the only thing I would say is perseverance and not being afraid to take a risk, because you take a risk every day crossing the street. You're going to get hit by a car or whatever might happen to you. You don't know. And people don't think like that because we're humans. We're not wired to think like that. But that's the reality. And a job is just a job. That's literally all it is. It's a way to pay bills. It's not the beginning and end. Anyway, that's my soapbox.
I like it a lot. This is gonna be our last question for you tonight, but as somebody who is building the teams that I think all of us in this room want to be a part of, what is something that you look for in young creatives? Like, what is something that you want to see in people coming into the industry now?
I mean, really, just for me, it's always been the same. It's a passion for the work. It's being a student of whatever the thing is you're in love with. So if you come in and you're an animator, I expect you to know who the animators are that have influenced you, what your favorite work is and why, and have a real drive to want to do it no matter by hook or by crook, no matter what, and not be passive about it. Because I'm telling you right now, the creative arts field, being passive, you're just never going to get anything done. It is all about overcoming obstacles from stupid people who get in your fucking way. That is literally the job. It's building bridges with fellow creatives. And then the other part is learning how to take a no and figure out how to make it a fucking yes. That is literally the other part. And I expect to see some amount of that passion and fire. It doesn't mean being a jerk. It doesn't mean railroading other people. It just means really a sense that you are excited and care. Because my coworkers, the people at my level, we, believe it or not, most of us are very excited and care a lot and work really hard. And we want to feel that from everyone involved because it just makes the whole thing better. I mean, like, not just the work, but your daily experience of working at a place. When you feel someone's like disengaged or not into it, then it just sucks. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much. You're being very inspiring right now. I'm very inspired. Thank you so much for giving us your time, and we would love to, if possible, take a photo in front of the screen that you're displayed on, if that's okay with you.
Of course, if you want. This is the hotel I'm in, but you're welcome.
Sweet.
I wish I could be there in person.
All right, everybody take a big step forward. A big step forward. One more step forward. Just one more. If you have light on your face, you should move forward. Thank you, Rose.
Do I act like I'm hugging everyone?
Walter, what were you saying?
Scavenger's Reign on the count of three. 1, 2, 3.
Scavenger's Reign!
All right. Jason, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
guys.
Jason.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, take it easy.
Bye, Jason.